Well, Fanalysis this week is focusing on the final notes before your fantasy draft, because if you've already had a draft, you might have gotten bitten by some injuries before week one. So let's bring in a sports handicapper and an analytics expert. You can find him on Twitter as Old Man Who Bets. Geoff Sheasby, good to see you once again, buddy.
Steve, great to be back.
And it's crazy how things have changed really within the past week, because major injuries are something that can absolutely change a draft. And Texans running back Lamar Miller now out for the season. Andrew Luck retiring. So which players have moved up in what we've seen in the preseason?
Yeah, Duke's a perfect guy to start with here. All of a sudden he's gone from a third down receiving back to the guy in Houston. Apparently, Bill O'Brien insists that they have, quote, a good scenario, a good situation going on there, which I'm not exactly sold on. I thought they might pick up a guy like Ajayi, Kenneth Dixon, maybe even Carlos Hyde, make that trade, get a veteran over there who's a little bit more on the every down back side of things. But nonetheless, Duke is skyrocketing. He's firmly in the running back 2, running back 3 scenario. And everybody else with Crockett, Higdon, they're not looking great. So if you're going to own a back in Texas, I think it's got to be Duke.
I think you're right that there is a definite possibility the Chiefs trade Carlos Hyde, because now at his salary, he's no longer really that valuable as a number 2, because right now he's kind of been shifted to the number 3 back in Kansas City.
I think even the 4.
Maybe even the 4 back as well. And when you look at Houston, yeah, it's great. Duke has moved into the RB1 there in Houston. But what's that offensive line like?
Yeah, that line leaves a lot to be desired. I don't know if it's necessarily Indianapolis Colts the last 3 years bad, but Watson got sacked, I think, a league high 62 times last year.
And he's got great legs.
Yeah, but so does Duke. So again, I'm not taking Duke in the first couple rounds, but I think RB 25 is where you take him. Before that, he was kind of a late round flyer, so he could firmly go in the 5th, 6th round, maybe even a little bit earlier.
So obviously the season begins next week. Oh, and by the way, one more note on Duke Johnson. In the past week, his average draft position has jumped from 132 to 77. So people are buying in. Right. People are paying close attention. All right, so clearly the season's about to begin, and the biggest boom or bust is Ezekiel Elliott. He could be the rushing champion. He could not play a single down in the NFL this year. We could be seeing some holdouts. So how aggressive should you be with Zeke? What kind of value do you want to give the backup to Zeke as well?
Yeah, I think Zeke's certainly dropping, but I think he's dropping from maybe a top 3 pick to maybe between 6 and 10. Why I don't like him there is in the first round, I'm looking for a guy who's definitely going to be on the field, who's going to give me full season-long value. He's not necessarily going to do that. Obviously, his upside is unbelievably strong. He's an absolute beast. Their line is incredible. Yada yada yada. But with Jerry Jones saying that they're preparing for a 6-week holdout maximum, obviously that gives some value to Tony Pollard.
Yeah, and what you're right, with that offensive line, you could get out there and probably rush for 100 yards.
Yeah, I think you're giving me a little bit too much credit in my cardio, but
75?
Yeah, we'll go with 75.
Okay.
The 40 time isn't what it once was, but nonetheless, Pollard's a guy I think you can snag probably in the 7th, 8th, 9th round. 7th is probably a little bit early, but if you're a guy that doesn't draft Zeke, obviously the Zeke drafter is going to be trying to get Pollard. So if you take that maybe a round early, A, you'll be able to maybe have a little bit of trade bait, and B, if he's getting the first week, 6 weeks, he's got a lot of standalone value.
This could be James Conner to Le'Veon Bell. This could be the exact same situation if Pollard has that offensive line to run behind. Melvin Gordon is holding firm on his holdout demands. The GM, by the way, says that there is no solution in sight, and the Chargers have depth at running back. How do you evaluate that situation?
Yeah, both of those guys, Eckler and Jackson, definitely, increase on the boards. I prefer Eckler because of his pass catching ability. He's shown that he has value, even if Gordon comes back in the last couple years as one of the premier 3rd down backs in the league. But, maybe Gordon gets traded to Houston, and then we have a really interesting scenario on our hands where we don't want Duke anymore, and we want Gordon back in the first 5 picks. Nonetheless, a lot of interesting things going on with holdouts, retirements, injuries.
It's amazing. There's so much more movement in the NFL right now. It's not quite gotten to the level of baseball, but there's a heck of a lot more movement in the NFL with trades and waiver wire pickups. And we are seeing a lot of new faces everywhere, and it's always a big question as to how these players will fit with their new rosters story with the chemistry of the offensive line and how it really fits into the offensive system. That's another thing that you have to take into account. Duke Johnson might have had success in Cleveland with that system, but what's that going to look like in Houston? What's Eckler's system going to be looking like if he's going, or what's it going to look like when he has to carry the ball 200 times?
Yeah, absolutely.
Same thing with Ito Smith. What if Devontae Freeman goes out? What happens with that guy? So there's always a lot of questions when it comes to stuff like that. And I think that, sometimes we see some old names popping up in the preseason, and it just, I don't know, sometimes it can be a little bit of a red flag and a red herring, but sometimes, these guys could actually be, a strong competitor. And I think the hot new name right now is Demaryius Thomas.
Yeah, DT back from the dead, apparently.
Is it one of these situations as a good route runner, someone that has a precise route running, and Tom Brady loves precise route runners, that this could be a marriage made in heaven?
I think so. DT, he's going relatively undrafted, I think, in almost all leagues. I did pick him up yesterday, halfway through the second quarter of the preseason finale, where he went 7 for 87 and 2 scores, looking explosive, a great back shoulder catch for one of those touchdowns. And remember, when we think about DT, from 2012 to 2016, he went over 1,000 yards every season with over 90 catches. Like, this guy was an absolute stud. He was a premier receiver, and then Denver started to Denver, and he lost all of his value. Nonetheless, I would take him as a late round flyer. But on paper, Flash Gordon, Demaryius Thomas, Tom Brady with Edelman underneath, that sounds like an explosive offense. And the whole kind of washed up older receiver, Demaryius Thomas, 31, coming to New England and having a resurgence. We've seen that a couple times before.
Randy Moss, Amendola, Wes Welker, all were kind of retreads with the Patriots and all became superstars.
And you got to love Welker coming from Denver.
That's right.
And excelling. And then DT, Denver, maybe excelling.
The path has been cut for him.
Pick him up in the 15th round and hope for the best.
Hey, listen, DT does a great job against third-string defenses in the preseason. Let's see what happens when he goes up against the number ones. I will say you're right. With Gronk's absence, they're going to be looking for somebody that he can rely on, and clearly that's a name that we're going to be looking for this year. All right, the preseason obviously also shows you the players that you need to move down your boards a little bit. Does it center all on the Colts right now because of the loss of Andrew Luck?
I think at the macro level, most of the dropping is of the Colts, right? Jacoby Brissett, certainly a downgrade. But while they are dropping, I think they've almost dropped too much, where there's now value in a guy like T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton has moved from one of the strongest wide receiver 2s, borderline wide receiver 1, especially in PPR leagues, to a guy who's now in a tier 4 with your Tyler Boyds, with your Calvin Ridleys.
Okay.
And I would much rather have T.Y. Hilton win that. If we look at T.Y. Hilton with Brissett, the last time he played, he had 900 yards. Not as good as the other seasons he's had, but we got Bill Parcells calling Brissett a Curtis Martin, a Willie McGinnis, Troy Brown type player. That's pretty high praise coming from Bill Parcells, no less. What does that mean? I don't know. But this is another year. It was his 3rd year for Brissett here. They have a stronger offensive line. They're loaded on offense. They have a new coach. I don't think he's going to be as poor as people are projecting him to be, especially when we look at the Colts win total with that big drop. I think it's now at 6.5. I think there's some value on that over. Back to fantasy for a second.
That's all right. We sprinkle those in. Just those little nuggets come through every now and again.
Exactly. But I think T.Y., I think he's totally fine. I snagged him as my 3rd receiver a couple drafts ago, and I'm feeling good about it. So I think he's now undervalued, even though he is, quote, dropping. And I think the Colts might still surprise us a little bit this year.
This is the benefit of a social media system right now that inundates you with information. There is an overreaction to this, to Andrew Luck's retirement. And you're right. T.Y. Hilton is falling maybe just a little bit too far. I wouldn't mind taking a chance on him. All right. That's a look at the movers of the preseason. Make sure you check out our segment on how to identify sharp money. For Geoff Sheasby, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.